All right. Well, we'll discuss it a little bit more, but the first thing that I would like to say is that what you're talking about is the normal. It is not unusual at all. Almost everyone has this. So that's the first thing to say about it is that it's absolutely normal
Hmm.
for one with an untrained mind. And it is a lot of um, time and right effort
Hmm.
to put in to um, to try to break up the pattern because the patterns are old, and that whenever we suffer a loss of something, um, we that's that's actual suffering as opposed to mere dissatisfaction. That if we someone can lose a pet dog and go into great grief about it. Another one can lose his mother. Another guy can lose his mother, but it's okay. Perhaps she's gotten very old and everybody in the family has been kind of waiting around for her to die, and she's 98 and she won't die, and she's 99 and she doesn't die, and she takes a lot of care, and she's 100 now and she still lives on, but she's bedbound. And so, taking care of a very elderly person, that person then becomes more of an object of care rather than uh, my mom died. And so, it's the way that you think about it. But the Buddha was quite, uh, actually, there's a sutta, and the name of the sutta is Grief Comes from Those Who Are Dear. And so you were mentioning a breakup, and that's what got you on kind of a downward spiral. All right. And so I would imagine that you still have thoughts of that girl.
I don't have thoughts anymore, but or maybe I might have buried them inside my subconscious. But like I
Well,
have this tightness on my
basically,
back.
a better way of looking at subconscious is conscious that we're not watching, not paying attention to.
True, that is very true.
Um, that the guys who invented the word and used the word subconscious were not Dhamma they were not meditators. And so they were not aware that much of the stuff that happens in the mind, we're not aware of it.
True. That's funny. I never thought so. That's true.
That's right. So many of the thoughts that we have, we can actually think about something, uh, but not understand or be awake to or conscious of that these thoughts that are being had right now are not wholesome. They're not conducive to well being, that in fact, they take us in the opposite direction, into unwholesome states.
Hmm.
And that there is a whole area of both psychology and medicine that they call psychosomatic.
Yes.
And what we mean by psychosomatic, the word somatic has to do with the body. So
Yes.
psychosomatic means that what we're doing with the minds that we're not watching or paying attention to affects the body. Possibly the easiest one for folks to understand is the relationship between the pineal and the pituitary gland and the adrenaline gland, because it's the adrenaline gland that pumps out both adrenaline and cortisol. And that what they have found is that people who are elderly generally have a high level of cortisol in their system. What that means is that while adrenaline will break up fairly quickly, cortisol does not. So it will build up over time, and they're beginning to link that kind of chemical system to what we call the psychosomatic illnesses.
Mm-hmm.
And that the way that we get started on getting to that is through sati. Now, a lot of people will sit in meditation and think that they're doing a lot of meditation for a long period of time or whatnot. But if they're not practicing sati, then whatever it is that they're doing is not going to, let us say, move them into a deeper understanding of what's going on. And this is what I mean by that. Sati is the Pali word that we use for remembering. Basically, you can say it is remember to remember. Or another way would talk about it would be remember to wake up, to remember to pay attention. And that the most basic way of doing that is with mindfulness of the breath. So that when you recognize that you're not paying attention to the breath, that your mind is not in a state of awareness or attention. That so long as you know that you're breathing, then you're much more awake than if you are not paying attention to the breath.
Oh,
And
can you
so that's
can you
why,
can you
go
repeat
ahead.
that again? Can you repeat that again? My bad.
You want me to repeat that? Okay.
Yeah.
While if we are watching the breath, then that's a good sign or an indication that we are awake and paying attention to the here now. And if we're not watching the breath, that's generally a good sign of showing that we are not here now, that we're off in the mental world. And that mental world, or that psycho part of the somatic, is generally what causes the trouble, and
Mm-hmm.
that we're not aware of it. So the very, very first practice that the Buddha has is to be mindful of the breath, merely understanding that it's an in breath or that it's an out breath,
Okay.
and that it is a deep breath. Goenka has the little phrase, "Never mind, start again."
Yeah.
And
I
what he, huh?
You remember me from last time like we had the last conversation and where I talked about Goenka, huh? Nice.
Never mind, start again. Now that
Yeah,
requires sati.
that
The
is very
never
true.
mind part is um, actually after the sati. Because when sati comes up, the first thing that happens with people is, oh, sati is gone. And that Goenka's phrase, never mind, start again, means to drop whatever was in the mind that had kept the mind away from the breath, and to
Mm-hmm.
come back to the breath and start paying attention to the breath.
Mm-hmm.
Most sure, making sure that it's a deep or long breath. Um, Now, here's the thing, the breathing is intricately involved with that psychosomatic. That breathing is, in fact, the key point between the psycho and the somatic,
Okay.
in the sense that um, if the mind is in a dull state, or more specifically, if it's in a state of fear or in a state of deep dissatisfaction that is associated with fear, then that puts the body into a state of freeze so that we're not getting enough air. Now, by not getting enough air, what that means is then the frontal cortex, the big supercomputer that is human part of the brain, is not getting enough oxygen, so it begins to shut down, not function so well. But the survival part of the brain, the more ancient part that we call the reptilian brain, that's
Yeah.
that's the last thing that shuts down. Even the heart will shut down before um, the reptilian brain. So it stays in gear, but it's in gear in a survival mode. But normally what's going on at that point in time is then because we're not paying attention to the breathing, we're not deep breathing, that the oxygen level of the blood begins to go down, and the carbon dioxide and other small pieces of junk in the blood starts to go up. And that when carbon dioxide is dissolved in water, and you know blood is mostly water,
Yeah.
then it creates an acid called carbonic acid. This carbonic acid is not so high that it triggers um, desperation breathing, or what I would call being out of breath, the kind of breathing that you would do if you were chasing someone and you had to stop to catch your breath.
Oh,
Like that.
yeah.
And that's happening most naturally. In fact, the body makes you do that. And that what you want to do is to stop doing that. People don't like to do it, it's a whole lot of work. And so they call it catching the breath. I got to stop and catch my breath. Why? Because my breath is really working really hard right now. But in this opposite state, the blood is basically in the same condition that it was when you're really working very hard, while you're just sitting still because the breathing has shut down. We're not getting enough oxygen. The carbon dioxide is building up, and so is the junk. And let me talk about the junk for just a minute. The junk is basically amino acids that are in partial or breakdown mode after um, either between the cell walls in their operation or inside the cell when, and this is happening especially with the brain, inside the cells of the brain, these amino acids will break down and then they're collected by the blood. And now it's the job of both the breathing and the kidneys to remove that stuff. Okay, so what's really going on is that we're already in a state of pumping adrenaline and cortisol into the blood that we don't need. It sits around in the blood doing the kinds of things that it would be doing if you were in fact in battle
Yeah, flight
or
or
in the
fight
fight.
mode, right?
Right. If
Yeah.
you were in real flight or real fight, then these chemicals would be of value. But instead, you're in freeze mode, and so this that's where the psychosomatic part comes in. Is that we've got things in the blood that are inappropriate for the actions or the behaviors in that moment. But by breathing well, taking deep breaths, we start to push that carbon dioxide and the remnants of those amino acids that break down out of the blood and purify the blood, oxygenating the blood now so that the frontal cortex will have enough energy or oxygen to perform well. That's very interesting, isn't it? Is that the
It
breathing really, really is an important point.
very true.
There is a very strong connection between depression and anxiety. Depression is actually trying to depress the anxiety that if we were not depressed, then we would be uptight anyway because of the anxiety. But both depression and anxiety have to do with the buildup of the stuff in the blood that we don't need. Now, back in the 1970s, there was a major experiment done.
Mm-hmm.
And that experiment was on a large group of people that had been diagnosed as clinically depressed. And so they divided them into 4 or 5 groups. One was that they were given medication by psychiatrists. Another one was that they were giving psychotherapy on a 1-to-1. Another group was given psychotherapy as a group. Another group was a control group that they got nothing. And then there was a group that did exercise. Guess what the results of that study on depression and anxiety revealed? The people who got the most benefit were the ones who were doing exercise.
That's true. But like I have felt that exercise can help you, but unless you address those emotions or unless you learn to cope with those repressed emotions, I have felt that the same issue keeps coming back again and again and again and again and again.
Well, here's the point that I was about to make, and that is
Uh-huh.
that it's not exercise,
Mm-hmm.
but that the exercise itself is related to breathing.
Oh,
So that when people were doing some exercise, they were breathing a little more. If they had
oh
given those
yes.
people breathing exercises, then
Uh-huh.
they possibly would got even more startling results.
Maybe. Because I remember Buddha said something like, your mind is connected with your breath or something.
Say that again?
Whatever happens in mind, it's shown in your breath. It's both are connected, mind and breath,
Yes, definitely. That's been
right?
known not just by Buddha, but it's been known for a long time. In fact, the
Oh, okay.
word anapanasati and pranayana are exactly the same word, just in 2 different languages. Anapana and pranayana are, one is in and out, and the other one is out and in. Ana is the in breath, pana is the out breath, but pranayana is prana is the out breath, and ana is the in breath. But you can see that one Sanskrit and the other one is in English. Can you still hear me? Your video has frozen.
Hello?
Yes, okay, so you're back. All right, good.
Yeah, my my battery almost died accidentally, so I had to plug in the charger.
Okay, your video is still frozen. If you will, on Skype, turn off the camera and turn it back on. There you go. Now you're back. Okay.
Okay.
While you were frozen, the discussion was the word anapana and pranayana.
Yeah.
That pranayana is actually the out breath and the in breath, and anapana is the in breath and the out breath. But pranayana has been known and practiced by
Before
yogis for a long time. The Buddha was actually doing some breathing exercises for working with first jhana. But then when he got into the higher jhanas and then also into austerities, tudong, um, self-flagellation, starving himself to death, and doing other things like that, then that shuts the breathing back down again. And so the practice of anapanasati is basically, there's three parts to it. Number one, the most important one is to remember. And then to remember what? To remember to breathe, and also remember to change the mind state that we're in. And this needs to be practiced over and over and over and over again, because the normal mind state is to start thinking about something, forget all about the breath, and then go into a dull state where the body is producing chemicals, kind of leaking in, not as a flood, but leaking in, because we're living in a state of instincts. We're living an instinctual life, just like all of the other animals do.
Mm-hmm.
And that we're not getting enough oxygen to support this frontal cortex that makes us human. And so humans actually do need to breathe better in order to start using better that frontal cortex that makes us human. And that's, you can also see why so many people are living their lives instinctually. A lot of
Deep breathing.
people even put a lot of stock in that. Say, like, follow your feelings. All right?
Mm-hmm.
Following your feelings, or let your heart show you the way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly opposite to what the Buddha is teaching. The Buddha is teaching, oh no, don't do that. Wake
Yeah.
up. Wake up and see what you're doing. Let's get that frontal cortex, let's get the human part of the brain working and functioning so that we can start to apply its power of wisdom, its power to see what's going on, to pay attention. And the first thing that we want to pay attention to is, are we breathing deep and long? Do we know the in breath, or do we know the out breath? But in all cases, let us say throughout that breath, there should be a few mind moments, instances, tenths of a second or so, that you're aware that you are aware of your breathing, that you know that you're breathing, that you're watching it. And so this is the first part of the skill to be developed, and it also is that part that's greatly going to help in the psychosomatic part.
Oh, okay. Okay. And then first is become conscious of your breathing, right? And then breathe deeper so
Mhm.
that cortisol decreases and your carbon gas decreases and prefrontal cortex activates. Then how? Okay.
It
Then
basically
how
is
do we?
cleaning out the mind in a chemical neurological way.
Yeah. And then how do we get from this like breathing and then like it's like how do we actually like use this technique to let all those emotions out? Like how do catharsis? How do you do catharsis or there's like
Well,
kind of thing?
all right. There's two parts of that. One
Okay.
part is by doing the breathing and breathing deep, you're actually beginning to change the blood chemistry. An
Okay.
example of that would be, many people feel anxiety as tightness in the chest. And yet,
I feel it on the back as tightness.
All right. So if
Yeah.
you've got tightness in the back, then the way to do it is they call it like this, and it's kind of conceptual, but you'll have to figure out what I mean in an experiential way, and that is what they call breathe into it. Wherever there is tightness, you're taking a deep breath that's full enough that the breath itself will reach that area of the body. So if you're tight in the chest, you'll breathe deep in, with the idea of breaking that stuff up in the chest. If it's in the back, then that has something more to do with posture. So you want to make sure that you're sitting up straight. Here's an
Mhm.
indication. If you're sitting up straight, then gravity is pulling you straight down. But
Mhm.
if your posture is bent over, then there
Mhm.
are muscles in the back that we're not aware of subconsciously are actually trying to hold up the body as it's leaning over.
Oh yes.
Sort of like the Leaning Tower of Pisa. They've had to go in and dig that thing out and put a whole lot of cement and everything to try to keep that building from falling over. And they'd never had to do any of that stuff if the building had stayed upright.
Yeah.
All right. So that's basically the thing to do is to make sure that it's upright. And the way to make the body upright is through breathing. By breathing, you breathe in and you start to stretch it a little bit and straighten it up a bit. And then as you breathe out, you let it relax, but you let it relax straight down. And then when you breathe, you let the body grow a little bit. Now, this is not going to necessarily work instantly, but it's going to have some small results that you can begin to notice.
Okay.
And then the pain will come back, and then you breathe back into it again. Um, is there other parts of the body other than backache that you're talking about?
My stomach too.
All right, so
I
now
ha-
you can
I
breathe
have a
into the diaphragm.
stomach.
Go
Yeah.
ahead.
I I think I have a significant high amount of acid production in my body.
A high amount of what?
Acid stomach acid production.
Acid. Okay.
Just because it's just like flight
Funny.
or fight yeah, flight or fight response.
Yes, funny. We were just talking about that, weren't we? With the carbon dioxide and water
Yes.
is an acid.
Yes.
That is so amazing, as well as all of the stuff that breaks food down is
Mhm.
associated with amino acids as well as bacteria. And so the, the stomach system is quite acidic. But if you start to breathe into it, then the acid that is excess will get collected by the blood and it will be exhaled so long as you're doing the breathing. Now, some of it will be exhaled and some of it will be recollected by the kidneys. That, in fact, that's a very interesting way of looking at this cortisol and adrenaline. Where does it come from? It comes from the adrenal gland. Now, the
Yes.
adrenal gland is not part of the brain.
Oh yes.
It is sitting right on top of the kidneys. For it to get its information, it's got to be hardwired right to the brain. Well, guess what it is? That's what we call the lymph system. And the pineal and the pituitary glands are actually directly connected to the adrenal gland. So when the reptilian part of the brain starts to become distressed or whatever, then these gland systems will go into operation so that the adrenaline gland will then go do its thing. Well, now, and if it's its thing is to put a bunch of crap into the blood, here's a question for you. Where does it get its crap to put into the blood?
From within.
From the kidneys.
Oh, yes.
Because that's exactly where the adrenal gland is. It is
Yeah.
sitting right on top of the kidneys. And so that you can see that's the function of it. That the
But
kidneys both clean the blood, but then the adrenaline gland takes that same stuff that is coming out of the blood and puts it right back into the blood after it does a bit of molecular engineering on it.
I have a feeling something might be stimulating my adrenal gland so that it releases. And that stimulation might be from my emotions, the repressed emotions. That's trying to
Right.
come out.
So guess what then is agitating the adrenal gland?
Yes.
Okay.
What is it? The
Thoughts and
thoughts.
feelings. Okay. And here's one of
Yes.
the things that's really profound about the Anapanasati Sutta at a particular place when people understand that it's in fact feelings are the mind's conditioner.
Okay.
That feelings condition the mind, and that happens in many, many different ways. Some good examples of that is you know about formal debates. You've heard of, okay, and one of the rules of formal debates is that you cannot do ad hominem attacks. That's where the word ad hominem comes from. It comes from debating. Why?
Okay.
Because if you call somebody's mother a bad word, or you give him a personal attack, then that throws that person, because of his own mental attachments, off his game. Your video has frozen again. All right.
The call seemed to drop. I don't know what happened.
All right, but it didn't drop the call and you called in, so we're going on. All right, the last thing that we were talking about then was in the debate society, the ad hominem attacks are not allowed because the ad hominem attacks will throw the opponent off his game because of his own attachments.
Okay.
If you can get somebody angry, worried, or frustrated, then that puts them into survival mode,
Yes.
which means it puts them into um, instinctual mode, and that then they go into shutdown. They stop breathing. Then the frontal cortex doesn't work so well anymore, and they can't continue their debate. They get frustrated. They forget words. They can't think well.
Oh, okay. That does make sense.
All right. So there's another way of
Oh.
looking at it. You can actually see that when people get really angry, they cannot think straight.
They cannot. True.
Can't
Because
think straight when you're angry.
that thing overpowers them. Like it takes them away, like a flood.
Exactly. But basically, the chemistry in the human brain is such that the reptilian brain takes over
Yes.
because anger is always based on fear.
Yes.
And so we go into survival mode. And because we're in survival mode, we can't think very well. So Anapanasati of the Buddha is designed specifically to turn that system upside down.
Oh. And then when I start doing that a lot, do you think my emotional brain will get activated?
Yes, we're going to activate that frontal cortex, and the way that we're going to activate it is in two ways. One is with breathing. But another one is actually changing the attitude of the mind by gladdening the mind. And
Okay, how do?
so, how do we do that? By starting to have happy thoughts.
Oh, try to focus on positive.
Right. The power of positive thinking and
Yes,
the power of breathing are
yes.
two forces that are extraordinarily useful. But the real power then is to remember to do this.
Okay.
And if you have the remembrance to practice positive thinking, then we begin to feel better
Oh, okay.
because the interrelationship is there not just from the feelings to the thoughts, but the thoughts now that are actually gladdening the mind. This gladdening the mind process is also part of the waking up process of the frontal cortex, which
Mm-hmm.
means now it's in charge, and
Mm-hmm.
that the pituitary adrenal system that was going on is no longer in control and begins to back off, begins to shut down. So, in that
That
way, our thoughts control our feelings, as well as our feelings control our thoughts.
thoughts. I would like to say one thing. I'm gonna. I'll do the breathing as deep as I can, and as I'll let it go towards my organs and stuff. But what I wanted to ask is, do you think the shutdown of shutdown or temporary or deactivation of reptilian brain is gonna be temporary? Like ever since I stopped breathing, do you think it's gonna bounce back? You know what I mean? Like it's gonna bounce back and make me like keep me in the survival state, or like if I keep continually doing the anapanasati in a deep way, as a practice is much and much and much, and do you think if I'm conscious enough to keep doing it for many days, do you think emotions are gonna come after a while?
Well, you can think of it like this: it's kind of like learning to play a musical instrument.
Okay.
And that is that it takes practice. It takes practice over and over and over again. Another way of thinking about it is that the way that you have been thinking has been following a pattern. It's been following a particular process, and it's gotten used to doing that particular process.
Mhm.
And that we use the word habit to describe that process that we normally do. And so here's an interesting point. If you have 5 or 6 people that are standing outside, all discussing any topic at all, who is the person who's most likely to light up a cigarette?
The person who isn't aware, or the person who is very agitated.
The one who is a smoker.
Yeah.
Isn't that really obvious?
Yeah, yeah, that's true. I mean, that's very obvious, but yeah,
Exactly. And why is that? We
it's
call him a
because of the
smoker because he's in the habit of smoking.
yes, every time, yes.
Okay,
That's
so
the
that
pattern of
shows
his mind.
that we have these habits that we do and that we only do it unconsciously, which
Mhm.
means we're not really paying attention to what we're doing. And this is what sati is all about. I like the word, if I had an English language word that I would use for sati, it would not be the word mindfulness.
That would be being aware of your
No, I
breathing.
would use the word wakey, wakey.
Wakey, wakey.
Yeah, wake up.
That's true.
Wake up. Why? Waking up then allows us to look at what we're doing. So we begin to see that, in fact, the mind was in hindrance. Now, the easy way to define hindrance is that which will hinder us from joy. It's the normal state of mind. Another way of talking about it is calling it junk thought. Junk thoughts will give us junk feelings, and
That
junk
is very true.
feelings will give us junk thoughts. And so this gladdening the mind, actually the Buddha talks about it in that reference. Gladdening, or making the mind delightful. If the mind can become delightful,
Mm-hmm.
delighted, in the sense of becoming not heavy, weightless,
Mm-hmm. Glad in the
because
mind
those
is very.
junk thoughts are heavy.
That is very true.
Mostly those junk thoughts have to do with plans to be made, jobs to be done,
Of
problems that
course.
we have had in the past that need to be solved,
These are all the triggers, right?
issues that need to be raised with other people.
Uh-huh.
All right. And now here's the thing that's really interesting. One student just recently has been talking about complexity science. And I was
Okay.
telling him, oh no, that's just really, really old stuff. The physicists have known all about
I
it.
couldn't hear you right now.
Pardon?
Your hello.
Hello? Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you. I'll check to see the video here.
Hello.
Audio.
Is your microphone muted?
No, the microphone is good. And now it is unmuted. So it must be on your end. I was going to test the microphone, but can you hear me now?
If you are hearing me, I'll call you. I'll call you back in a while. Or because I couldn't hear it. I might.
Okay.
It might be. It might be issues from my side.
Yes, check your Skype because this one seems to be okay.